Welcome to this tactical analysis of the Arsenal versus Manchester City game. This is on New Year's Day, so happy New Year's to you. So let's start it right by giving this video a like, subscribing, and sharing it on social media. With that, let's get into it. Unfortunately, we start off by having to mention the referee. I think they were quite influential in this game. I'm not going to say whether I think their decisions were right or wrong. I think it was subjective. And whilst those decisions didn't go in Arsenal's favour, I do think Arsenal had a key opportunity with Martinelli's miss to put the game hugely in their favour. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to how Arsenal built up out of the back, or more precisely, how they didn't build up out of the back. So they would set up in a 2-1-2 or a 2-3 deep, but wanted Ramsdale to kick it long. This continued even after the red card. They hit it long towards those forwards, not necessarily to release them, but to get the ball into that area for them to try and contest, having the fullbacks higher up as well, and the forwards towards that side allowed them to be able to contest second balls. And we see that here with this example where you have the ball hit towards that right-hand side, there's a little bit of head tennis, and eventually you have the ball played in behind for Saka. Saka and Martinelli were really important for Arsenal's attack this game. Their pace was just really frightening. They were constantly positioning really wide and really aggressively on the shoulder of the last man to try and get in early, and they were helped in this by how quick Partey was in trying to find them when Arsenal got back on the ball. I need to say that Partey was absolutely massive this game. Positioned at CDM, but stepping through the Manchester midfield, taking advantage of the fact that Cancelo, Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne are playing as almost all of them free eights. It meant that in transition, he had the opportunity to be able to try and hit Manchester City as quick as possible. This is something that we saw Leicester City take advantage of against Manchester City. That brief period where Manchester City are in transition from an attacking shape into a defensive shape, there is a moment of weakness there, and Arsenal were looking to try and exploit that here as well. So speaking of that directness, I think that Arsenal's players playing quickly, playing incisive passes allowed them to maintain the advantage, that being the free eights being caught in transition when they regain possession. To try and facilitate these opportunities to regain possession high up in Manchester City's half, we've talked about the long goal kick, but also counter-pressing from Arsenal with the high position of their fullbacks, as well as also Xhaka and Partey trying to support that counter-press after Arsenal have taken the ball out into wide space and crossed it. So this is an example of Arsenal playing directly. We've got Manchester City building up in a 3-1-3-3 or a 3-4-3. The reason why I distinguish between 3-1-3 or a 3-4-3 is because of the positioning of those free eights. So we've got Cancelo here, you've also got De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva, and these three were constantly looking to try and float higher than Rodri. So Rodri was going to be that CDM, constantly shuttling to try and provide an easy passing option for their centre-backs, as well as also those free eights. Despite the attention from Martin Odegaard in Arsenal's 4-2-3-1 press, or you could call it a 4-4-1-1, because the four in midfield of Arsenal would be typically deeper than Odegaard would. Note also that the far-sided forward is trying to tuck in, and generally Arsenal were doing that, I guess, on both sides. You see here with Martinelli as well, tucking in. They're trying to make it really difficult to be able to play into these spaces. During this 4-2-3-1 or 4-4-1-1 press of Arsenal, there was a lot of onus on the defensive line as well as the centre midfielders and wide midfielders to kind of cover the gaps that appeared in the press. So for example, here we can see Xhaka, who's meant to be playing, less centre midfield, but he's out here pressing against Bernardo Silva. With the way that Manchester City typically want to try and get the ball into those dangerous areas or maybe into a half space, so you're going to have the Arsenal defenders, so for example, Gabriel, having to try and cover if Manchester City are able to get the ball into these kind of spaces. Of course, it's a Man City, so we've got Gabriel Jesus, the centre forward, dropping and creating an overload in midfield. With the narrowing that we talked about with Saka, it does mean that you have space far side. So Raheem Sterling here holding the width on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you've got either Bernardo Silva or Riyad Mahrez holding the width. Unfortunately for Manchester City, Tomiyasu is able to read the ball and Arsenal regain possession. Of course, immediately you see Manchester City looking to try and counter-press. You've got De Bruyne, one of the first forward, trying to cover that pass into Partey. Got Ake looking to anticipate any passes into Saka, as well as also Rodri trying to support this press by getting up. Partey makes himself available and he takes an absolutely beautiful touch, allowing him to break into this space where Rodri is trying to get into. And with that back foot touch, Partey is able to then release Xhaka, who's also gambled on Partey and the rest of the back line being able to evade the press. And now Arsenal are in full flight. You've got your wingers driving down their channels. You've got your other forwards in Odegaard and Lacazette also trying to, get in behind. Eventually, the ball is played out into the wide space for Martinelli. Unfortunately, his touch is a bit poor, but this is still a good example because it shows both that directness, the influence of Thomas Partey being able to evade that pressure on the Arsenal regain. And then you finally have the fullbacks for Arsenal getting up. In the case of Tierney, he's getting up to try and overlap, whereas in the case of Tomiyasu far side, he's trying to get into more of a counter-pressing position so that when this cross goes in, if it's defended and headed out, he'll be there to immediately be able to press, for example, Sterling, and you're getting the same with the likes of Thomas Partey, etc. They're looking to try and counter-press immediately. Of course, for both teams, corners were really important. They both had a handful each. And with that, we're going to move on to Manchester City's build-up. They typically built up in a 3-1 deep and then moved to a 3-1 in midfield as well, that 3-1-3-3 or 3-4-3. And then after the Gabriel red card, then they moved to a 2-3 instead. Arsenal's press was a 4-2-3-1, but if Manchester City were playing it out from their goalkeeper, then it almost looked like a 4-3-1-2. So you'd have Odegaard tracking Rodri, and you'd have one of those forwards, typically Saka, higher up, trying to press the centre-backs and the goalkeeper, whilst the far side, in this case Martinelli, forward, would have dropped into more of a wide midfield position. And of course, behind them, the defence and the centre midfielders are trying to support this press. Manchester City weren't really flustered by the press. They were happy to pass it short or long. Of course, in the second half, once Gabriel had his red card, then Arsenal just had to retreat. But before that, Manchester City were constantly mixing it up, really looking to try and take advantage of the long passing of Edison. Okay, so we see that in this example. We've got Saka in that position that we mentioned, so more of that 4-3-1-2 shape. Saka's not really in like a right winger or right forward position. He's more of a right centre forward position. If the ball is passed out to Ake, he can get there as quick as possible. And if the ball is passed short to Laporte, he can go and press there, with Lacazette being able to cover across towards the left. Instead of a short pass, Edison hits a long ball with kind of freakish accuracy. Unlike Arsenal, where Ramsdale was typically focusing his long balls towards the right-hand side where Saka was, there was a lot more variety with Manchester City's Edison. He would pick wherever he thought Manchester City had an advantage. So in this case, he's picked Riyad Mahrez, who's started basically on the shoulder of the last man. We've got Tierney in quite an aggressive position, probably looking to try and press towards Cancelo if Manchester City passed short. Gabriel Jesus had dropped off, making it more difficult for the back line of Arsenal to be able to pick him up. You've got the centre midfielders of Arsenal higher up, away from Gabriel Jesus, because they're trying to support the press higher up the pitch in Manchester City's half. We've got Cancelo, the right back, at least on paper, in kind of a right wing, right midfield position. As I mentioned, it was difficult to pin down his exact position because he was really working as I thought a 3-8. He was just a lot more aggressive positionally than Ake was as the left back. And here we've got a really nice exchange of positions. Cancelo and Riyad Mahrez pass the ball between each other, and Cancelo pushes higher up the pitch, forcing Martinelli into a decision. He has to obviously track Cancelo initially, but as the ball is passed to Riyad Mahrez, then he has to track Mahrez instead. But now Manchester City have the ball with a lot of time and space here, and they've completely evaded the Arsenal press anywhere near their box. Note also another distracting run here by Gabriel Jesus. He's made his run from behind the centre midfield of Arsenal, so between the defence and midfield line, and he's dragging Xhaka with him, again reducing the amount of pressure that Arsenal can put in a dangerous position in Manchester City's half. And with that relief of pressure, Manchester City are able to circulate the ball around the back. He eventually gets out towards Laporte, who plays it towards Raheem Sterling. Again here, I think this is a good example of the Arsenal midfield four, so that 4-4-1 that we mentioned. So we've got the back line, we've got the midfield, and then we've got Odegaard in that CAM position, trying to keep track of Rodri. We've got that 3-1-3-3 that we mentioned with regards to Manchester City. So you've got your centre-backs, you've got your CDM, and then you have your 3-8s with Raheem Sterling and Riyad Mahrez holding the width. De Bruyne and Raheem Sterling try and combine and release Raheem Sterling in this left-hand side channel versus Tomiyasu. Tomiyasu wasn't having any of it this game. He was really good against Sterling, despite Sterling being absolutely rapid. I'd say that on the right-hand side, so Manchester City's right-hand side, Arsenal's left-hand side versus Tierney, despite the centre midfielder for Arsenal, so Xhaka, typically coming across to try and help defend that half space, trying to support Tierney versus whether it was Bernardo Silva or Riyad Mahrez, as well as also Martinelli. Tierney was still kind of tormented on that side, typically by the smart positioning of whether it was Bernardo Silva or maybe Gabriel Jesus or Riyad Mahrez. They would position inside of him, so between him and Gabriel, and that way Tierney can't go out to whoever the wide player is unless one of Tierney's teammates, so typically Xhaka, will step into that half space and allow Tierney to be able to immediately go out and pressure whoever's in that wide space. Okay, so we have another example of Arsenal's 4-2-3-1 press. We have our wide midfielders in Martinelli and Saka, relatively narrow again, trying to make it very difficult for Manchester City to be able to pass into this central space. We have that back line, that back three for Manchester City, with the one centre defensive midfielder and the 3-8s all roaming in different lines, and in this case Riyad Mahrez is a bit deeper. As I mentioned earlier, Tierney, so one of the defenders, is coming up to try and support this press, so he's trying to track the forward who's dropped, and with his pressure Arsenal are able to convince Cancelo here to pass the ball back into Diaz, and with that even further into Laporte, the central centre back. Unfortunately, due to the narrowness of the far-sided forward, in this case Saka, it does then mean that Ake is extremely free on this left-hand side, and he's able to just run up unopposed on the left-hand side, almost into Arsenal's half, so almost 20-30 yards. Was behind those front two in the press for Arsenal. The rest of the players, so in this case Odegaard, is trying to cover the gap that's opened up in their press, so he's trying to come over to Saka's right midfield position. Okay, so after the red card, Manchester City played 2-3-5. They had Gundogan come on in place of Jesus, and of course this is Manchester City, so they continued making those rotations. We talked about those 3-3-8s, and now you also have Gundogan, who's constantly looking to take up a position on that left hand side, whether it's left wing or left half space or even centre forward. He's constantly moving between those lines, between being a forward and a centre midfielder, so those forwards are constantly dropping and trying to draw Arsenal defenders off their back line. So Arsenal moved to more of a 4-4-1 initially when they still had Lacazette on the pitch, and then a 5-4, and then eventually they settled on a 5-3-1 with Martinelli as the centre forward, with a three in midfield of Partey, Smith Rowe and Saka, of course looking to try and counter-attack through those wide midfielders and pacey centre forward. Manchester City constantly had, as we mentioned, those players dropping off the line, but then they also had players running from the midfield and trying to run in behind Arsenal. This would force Arsenal to retreat and lose ground because players had to track those runners, and then with that Manchester City were able to push their centre backs Laporte and Diaz aggressively high up the pitch and counter press and try and reduce or remove the option for Arsenal to be able to counter. Of course, in those wide spaces we're still trying to do the same thing. We're trying to create 1v1s, again smart positioning of those players in the half spaces or between central centre back and full back prevents the full back or wing back in this case from being able to go out quickly to the wide player, or someone not tracking a run. A late run into that half space allows a whipped cross or a cut back. That's what Manchester City are looking to try and create. And of course, if Arsenal do set up in that 5-3-1 and don't come out to try and engage Manchester City, then you've got De Bruyne, who's happy to just drop off maybe 10 yards and be able to whip in a ball from deep towards the far post. We've got Manchester City here in that 2-3-5. Can't see Ake, but he's over here. You've got your centre defensive midfielder. You've got your two centre backs. We've got Arsenal in their 5-3-1, as we just mentioned, with the centre midfield looking to try and shuttle across and try and help out in those wide spaces. Xhaka had dropped into a left centre-back position. The choice of a back five is just to match up with Manchester City's 2-3-5, and the fact that they're constantly looking to try and look for runners or play in those half spaces where it's very difficult for the full-back and centre-back to be able to defend without then creating a problem elsewhere. Again, as we just mentioned, we've got one of the Manchester City forwards, in this case De Bruyne, dropping off the line, creating a problem for his centre-back. And here's De Bruyne being that problem. He's able to receive the ball, force Arsenal into retreating, and now we've got a space here for the likes of Cancelo, as well as also Bernardo Silva to try and exploit as the centre-back decides to step out and leave this space for Manchester City to be able to try and attack. Arsenal are really dogged in their defence, even going down to 10 men, and Partey looks to try and press Raheem Sterling on his poor touch. Partey is successful in getting the ball off Raheem Sterling, and Arsenal look to try and counter, this being their key reads of attack once they obviously went down to 10 men. With that, we've covered the main points. Please have a look in the description as well as the comments down below for a full tactical summary. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider sharing it on social media and subscribing, and with that, we're out.